T-minus 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is normally regarded as the worst plant in PvZ2 history, but I feel as if it needs redemption, so I maxed it out and put it up against the entire game by itself, and genuinely I was surprised at how it performed. But before we get too deep into the challenge, let me first explain the rules. Only Vampircini, no power-ups or Zen Garden, skip all levels that force the use of another plant, pre-placed plants are fine, and lastly, coins earned throughout the challenge can be used to buy plant food, but no replaying levels to farm coins. Okay, let's see how it did. We first, of course, start off on day 1 of Ancient Egypt, where I should tell you exactly what this plant does and its stats at max level. And basically, as you've already seen, when you plant it down, it has this bat aura around it for 6 seconds. And that bat aura you can think of as a health draining attack, which deals damage to the zombies and drains health, adding it to the Vampircini's own health. After that 6 seconds, it just reverts to a defensive wall plant like the walnut. And if this was the only attack available, this would have been a painful challenge, but thankfully I found out that plant fooding it makes it so that bat aura stays around it infinitely. But there is a difference though between the initial aura and the plant food aura. At level 1, the initial aura does 20 damage and the plant food aura does 10 damage, while at max level, the initial aura does 75 damage while the plant food one does 38 damage. So basically the plant food damage is half of the normal one. Another aspect of the damage is how fast it attacks, and at max level it's every 0.75 seconds, while at level 1 it's only every 2 seconds. And all these numbers can get a little confusing, so to simplify it, all you have to know is that the max level Vampircini deals 10 times the damage of the level 1 Vampircini. Oh, and then there's also the Mastery Pierce bonus, so it actually does 20 times the damage as the level 1. But moving on from damage, it also gets a pretty significant health upgrade since it is a wall plant. At level 1, its initial health is 2,700 while its max health is 4,000, and at max level its initial health is 6,750 while its max health is 11,000, plus an extra 2,000 from the mastery. But you might be wondering what initial and max health mean in this case, and basically when you first plant it down, the Vampircini starts at the initial health, and then with its attack it can suck the health out of the other zombies and give it to itself, which for the mastery 200 Vampircini maxes out at 13,000 health. And the attack and damage are the only stats that change with leveling up the Vampircini, because the sun cost stays a consistent 100 from level 1 to mastery 200. And the same exact thing happens with this recharge, where it just stays at 20 seconds. But that's enough analytics for now, and let's actually get into the real gameplay. Because if you look at this Vampircini, you can see that it can't attack the tombstones on the ground. And you'll see later on in the challenge that this applies to the surfer's surfboard in Big Wave Beach and the frozen plants and zombies in the frostbite caves, which the frostbite caves especially can be problematic. But for now, since the Vampircini is able to hit its adjacent lanes, if you plant 2 of them in the top middle lane and bottom middle lane and plant food on both, you're basically able to hit every zombie that's sent at you. And since it's so tanky and attacks infinitely with the plant food, it's nearly impossible for it to struggle against a zombie. Well, until you run into zombies like the Explorer who can one-shot him. But this is another place that Vampircini actually shines, because in that first 6 seconds it's invincible, which gives us a very reliable way to take out the Explorers. Because if you remember, the last semi-defensive plant that I did with the max level solo was the Torchwood, and in that video we had to use this weird roundabout strategy that we figured out to defeat them. And on the topic of the Torchwood video, it's now almost been a year since I uploaded it, which is pretty crazy because that was a plant slash video that started this journey. And my main reason for actually mentioning the video is because our goal in this video is to try to beat the Torchwood. And if you don't remember, Torchwood was able to beat every level besides day 30 of Big Wave Beach. And seeing how the Vampircinis performed so far, I do have high hopes for it, but we'll just have to wait and see for the true results. And as for now, we actually ran into a little problem on day 9 where my plant-fooded Vampircinis couldn't take out the Explorer zombies on time and they got destroyed by the fire, which led to this result on the final wave, and I had to make sure that the middle lane didn't get too far because it didn't have a mower. So the Explorer zombie there was taken out, and all the other lanes I didn't have to worry about as they had had mowers in them. So even with a slight problem, we made it through the level. And then days 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 were all easily beaten. Day 18, we took a little stop and prepared some defenses. And since we heavily overcompensated, nothing made it through the defenses. Day 20, however, we did run into our first problem. In this level, there's two big waves and we have to protect these sunflowers from being eaten or destroyed by the explorers. And the explorer was exactly who I messed up against because I tried to destroy the zombie in the bottom lane, but then an explorer appeared in the very top lane. And if you remember, the recharge of the Vamporcini is 20 seconds. And even though I'd just gotten it back by the time the explorer got close, it wasn't fast enough and my sunflower was burned, making for my first loss, but this was easily fixable. So on the second try, I made sure to stall and time my Vamporcini right so the explorer didn't take out that sunflower. And just to be extra careful on this level, I was actually preserving my plant food for whenever it might be needed. Because though usually the right move is just using the plant food on the Vamporcini, you can also use the plant food to instantly recharge the seed slot, which makes it extremely strong against explorers if needed. But the strategy wasn't needed and we ended up winning pretty easily. Day 21 is pretty simple. Day 22 has a challenge where we can only plant 16 plants on the lawn, and it's rare that we ever get that many down, so we won pretty easily. Day 23 wasn't problematic at all, but there are two things that you might be interested in. One, if you look in the very bottom lane, you'll see that that zombie has a plant food, and sometimes whenever I felt it was beneficial for me, I would just launch a mower early to get the plant food, so there's a lower risk of me losing my other mowers and I could preserve them for the final wave. And the second thing you might be interested in is how the Vamporcini fares up against a Gargantuar. And though its damage is pretty high, it's actually not good enough to just instantly destroy a Gargantuar, so some of them get taken out usually, but we can use that advantage of them attacking in adjacent lanes, in a way slowly avoiding losing our Vamporcinis and dwindling the health of the Gargantuar. And this strategy is extremely helpful in the later worlds where there's more Gargantuar sent. But for now, we made it to day 24 of Ancient Egypt, which is the last level we play, and we prepare defenses. And since I knew that there'd be sandstorms and explorer zombies in this level, I strategically placed my Vamporcinis a little farther back, or at least the ones that I plant fooded. And since a lot of the ones that were up far front couldn't attack, they eventually all got eaten. But these three, as they were plant fooded, were more than enough to deal with all the zombies. And we eventually won against day 24 and now had beaten all of Ancient Egypt using just a max level Vamporcini. But let's see how it puts up in Pirate Seas, though the strategy is a lot different, mainly due to the reason that there's always lanes missing and pirates swinging halfway across the map, forcing us to plant food some of the Vamporcinis farther back and then also having them up front in the lanes that weren't missing. It was still probably one of the easier worlds in the entire game, as we don't ever end up losing, even to levels where we had to protect flowers from being trampled on, like this one where they were all the way in the back, or even levels like day 22 where they send an insane amount of imps at us, but since the Vamporcini has infinite pierce, just two of them with their plant food abilities activated was enough to defeat the entire level. Day 24, which is the final level that we play of the Pirate Seas, was a little scary at first as we have to defend these spring beans in the top and bottom lane, and it was mainly only scary as we didn't have two plant food to cover both of the spring bean, but as soon as we got both of them plant fooded, the level became extremely easy because the pirate swinging zombies couldn't even land before they got taken out. And just like that, Pirate Seas was defeated, but we run into a little bit more difficulty in the And when I said we run into difficulty, well, I kind of lied because we breezed past the first 7 levels. In day 10, though, a lot of plants struggle here a little bit because this is when the chickens are introduced. The Vamporcinis only struggled in the beginning because they didn't have a plant food power up, but after we had coverage on all 5 lanes, the chickens couldn't get through at all. And sometimes plants, even though they're able to defeat a lot of the chickens, they can struggle because the chickens just eat through their health very quickly. The Vamporcini is basically immune to this because it has a ton of health, and even if it loses it, it can just heal it over time. So it's a pretty solid counter to the chickens here. Day 18, we prepared some defenses, and I placed them very high up, mainly due to the dynamite zombies. And not that they'd be a problem, it would just waste time, and the level was beat much faster this way. We actually did lose on day 21, kind of similarly to that one Ancient Egypt level where we had to protect the sunflowers, because I placed my Vamporcini a little too quick, not realizing a zombie would be coming in, and it kind of just trampled the flowers. On the second try, this problem did not occur, 24, and we were able to win. Day 23 is actually a scarier version of day 21, as we can only lose 2 plants, which is pretty possible with the Vampuccinis, and more importantly, we couldn't let these sunflowers in the back get trampled on. And what makes this a more difficult version isn't that losing 2 plants rule, it's actually the chickens that are sent in. But my plan here was pretty simple, which was building a wall right in front of the flowers, and then placing a couple of Vampuccinis farther forward that were each going to be plant fooded. The wall in the back was more for the beginning of the game when none of my Vampuccinis were plant fooded, and it was to stop any of the zombies that got too far. But once we had all the plant food abilities up, we pretty easily conquered this level. Day 24 on the other hand, which is the last level we played of the Wild West, went much differently. And I'm not gonna lie, it was only due to the reason that I assumed that there would be the piano zombies in this level, because I didn't really check the zombies before starting. And what I mean by that is that I wasn't planting my Vampuccinis far up front because they would get instantly destroyed by the pianos, which led to this awkward thing where I had to maneuver around my walnuts and let them get past so they could reach the Vampuccinis that were plant fooded in the back. And this plan was working okay at first when there weren't too many zombies on the screen, but as soon as it got a little overwhelming, I lost track, and then the 2 zombies in the very top lane were eating away at the walnut and I didn't realize it, and then a ton of chickens started eating away at the walnut as well, which left its health really low, so I moved it downwards, but then it got instantly eaten by the zombies that were there. The second try, as I knew what to expect, was much easier. I did lose basically all of my lawnmowers in the beginning of the level, but this was done on purpose so I could stall out time and get a Vampuccini in all 5 lanes up front. And as soon as I got in 2 of my Vampuccinis plant fooded up front and all 5 lanes were covered, it meant that we'd basically won because we didn't have to worry about the pianos instantly destroying them. And after about 20 more seconds, all of Wild West had now been defeated by only Vampuccinis. Next up, the word I'd use to describe the Frostbite Caves is tedious, because it's extremely annoying plant fooding one of your Vampuccinis and then it getting frozen either by the snowstorms or the snowball throwers. And what makes it even more annoying is that the Vampuccini's attack can't break the ice, and once they're frozen forever. But the good thing about the Vampuccini is that even if all of your other ones are frozen, a lot of the times just 1 or 2 is enough to defeat most of the zombies on the level, or just stall long enough so that the next one recharges and can support it. And this constant battle against the ice was pretty annoying, especially on levels like day 11 where there's tons of snowstorms, so you have to be pretty coordinated of when and where you're placing your Vampuccinis, because you don't want any of them freezing in a place that's important and could cost you the game. Like for example, the one in the bottom lane is a very important one because 1, it didn't have a lawnmower behind it, and 2, all of the lanes funnel into that last lane, but eventually it did get frozen. And to counter this, I had to place Vampuccinis on the lane right above it and then plant food them, which thankfully was able to counter this problem, and we actually ended up beating day 11 on our very first attempt. Day 15 was a pretty interesting one because it provided us with pepper bolts for fire support, but somehow I still ended up messing it up and a zombie got through, eating away at the pepper bolt. On the second try, I made sure to spam a lot more Vampuccinis, which easily solved the problem. The next problem we ran into was on day 23, where we have to protect these chard guards in the back, and it was going pretty well for the most part because chard guards are pretty easy to protect, but then I kind of forgot that the caveman ice pushers actually just instantly eliminate your plants, so the chard guard in the very bottom lane got taken out. But like the pepper pot level, this was something easy to manage as I just have to take out the caveman that's pushing the ice, so we do end up winning. And day 27 was the one level that was actually pretty scary because 1, we have to protect these rutabagas in the back, and the game just sends in a ton of ice pushers throughout the level and a lot of gargantuars in the final wave. And the main problem with this is again that the Vampuccinis can't break the ice, so most of the lanes that we'd use for the Vampuccinis are just covered and we can't do anything about it. And like I mentioned, gargantuars are sent in towards the end and they become a huge problem because we just don't have enough space and time to take them out, which ended up with one of my rutabagas being crushed on my first attempt. But I did have a semi-solution to this on the second try, which was planting the Vampuccinis right behind these redirection pads. And this is important because it makes it so the ice being pushed towards the Vampuccinis can't take them out, because the caveman ice pushers can't push the frozen imps over the redirection pads. This makes it to where I don't end up wasting my plant food and have it preserved throughout the entire level on those 2 Vampuccinis, and then all I have to worry about is consistently taking out the cavemen and then just preparing for the gargantuars, which consists of using 1 extra Vampuccini to deal damage to it, and then the 2 plant fooded ones can deal the rest of the damage. I did get a little scared with this Gargantuar in the very bottom lane, but it did end up working out because I placed a Vampircini behind it and then plant fooded the one in the lane above, which was perfectly placed to take it out. And as I approached the redirection pad, it had thankfully been defeated. And a second later, the middle lane one was defeated as well, leaving one more ice block zombie, meaning we had finally beaten day 27, leading us to day 28, which has a lot of snowstorms and weasels in it. But the only real scary thing was the Gargantuar in the bottom lane approaching when there was no lawnmower there. But my Vampircinis in the lanes above were able to deal enough damage to take it out, and then I planted one more in the back for the imps, and with that we'd beaten all of the Frostbite caves using just a max level Vampircini. And next up, we're going to be super speeding through 3 worlds, which are Lost City. There isn't really much to say about besides the fact that I was a little scared of the dragonflies because I was unsure if it could hit flying enemies, but those guys ended up being pretty easy to defeat. But then another problem came in with the tent carrying imp zombies, and those guys were annoying if the tent got onto the gold tiles because it meant that the only way to take out the tent was with the lawnmower, because again the Vampircini can't damage most grid items. But even those guys were pretty easily countered and were able to defeat all of the levels on the first try. Our future was even easier, with my only worry again being the flying jetpack zombie, but as I'd found out in the last world it could hit the flying enemies, this wasn't a problem either. In the Dark Ages, normally the problem is the jester zombie, but the Vampircini basically treats him like a normal zombie as it can't counter him, which basically just leaves the wizard as a threat, who honestly was pretty easy to defeat as well. And with that, we'd successfully beaten all 3 of these worlds without losing on a single level. But we do face some real problems in the Dynamic Sip Tour was definitely one of the more problematic levels, and I'm skipping over all the easy levels, going straight to the problem, which started on day 15, where we have to protect these fat beats in the middle. And similarly to the other times I lost to levels like this, it was because I didn't know where the zombies were going to spawn in. And I was left in this situation where I had to choose between these zombies, so I chose the top one, but then I thought the fat beats in the bottom 2 lanes would take care of that zombie, but then they couldn't, and the fat beat got eaten. And that actually could have been avoided there if I launched my mower, but like I said, I thought that the fat beats were going to deal with it. On the second try, this problem was completely negated because I knew where the zombies were going to come in, and with 2 Vampircinis plant fooded in the top middle and bottom middle lanes, we ended up winning. The second problem occurs on day 21, where we have to protect these flowers from being trampled on, and this time the issue was very similar, but it was a little bit more problematic because the Mohawk zombie in the top lane was a lot faster. So this time I had to use a mower to get rid of it, but then 2 more Mohawks spawned in lanes that I didn't have the Vampircini in, but I was able to defeat him by planting one right in between them, and then a ton of other zombies were sent in. But the main problem came in to the middle lane, as I did have 2 Vampircinis plant fooded to deal most of the damage. But an interesting thing happened here, where because the Vampircini is invincible, the Gargantuar actually just walks right through it and made it past the flowers. So even though that invincibility is very helpful to us most of the time, it can be problematic when you actually need the Vampircini to block the zombies, because like you just saw with the Gargantuar, they end up just walking right past it. And it was important that I mentioned this because you're gonna see later on that this is one of the most annoying things about this plant. Like for example, right here, I planted one right in front of the Mohawk, but of course he couldn't block it, so the Mohawk made it past the flowers again. And then I actually lost a couple more times, but I was pretty confident that I could beat this level. The only thing is that I'd have to buy 1 plant food for the beginning of the level, and this plant food makes it to where we're able to handle the early zombies and then also get a second plant food from this Mohawk, allowing me to cover all 5 lanes early on, leaving basically this Gargantuar left to deal with, who we're able to defeat. But then another one appears in the final wave, and this guy actually ends up destroying both of the Vampircinis in front of it, but I did still have my mower launch, and I kind of just didn't want to risk it, so I used it right away. And we'd finally beaten the annoying day 21, but then came in day 23 with even more annoyances in the shape of arcade machines. And these things are very similar to the tents in the Lost City, where if they're on the lawn, the only way I can defeat them is with the lawnmowers, because the Vampircini isn't able to deal damage to him. And as I'd lost 2 of my mowers in the middle and top middle lane, there became a huge problem when an arcade machine got pushed into the middle lane. And with arcade machines, a lot of the time they're turned off when the music isn't blasting, but on this level specifically, the music stays blasting until the end, so there literally wasn't any way I could defeat those 2 arcade machines in the lanes without the mowers, basically soft locking attacking me, so I decided to restart. On the second attempt, the goal of course became preserving all of my mowers until the very final wave. That would make it to where I wouldn't have to worry about any of the arcade machines. And the strategy that I used was actually pretty simple in planting Vamporcinis that were plant fooded in the middle of the lawn, and these are able to basically take out any zombie that's sent towards them, with the sole exception of the arcade machines if they get pushed over them. And that's where the second part of the strategy comes in, and it's taking out the caveman zombies before they're able to do that. But I did kind of end up failing a little bit as both of my Vamporcinis got defeated, and by this point this actually didn't matter because if you look up top, the final wave had already come in and we still had all of our mowers intact. So they were able to handle the rest of the zombies and we'd beaten day 23. The next problem occurred on day 28, and it was all due to the introduction of the boombox zombie, who at very critical moments would end up hypnotizing my plants and then they'd get destroyed by the arcade machines, leading me to lose my mowers very early on. And the arcade mower thing wasn't even the main problem, as the boombox zombies literally just kept on hypnotizing the Vamporcinis over and over again. And at this point it was looking pretty cooked, but I played it out to just try and see if maybe I had a chance, and it was actually looking okay. But then the music started as the final wave came in and the zombies in the bottom lane got kicked forward by the dancer zombie, which in return ended up beating me. On the second attempt though, the strategy was set in stone: defeat the boombox zombies before they had too much of a chance to take over. And doing this actually worked, as we made it to the final wave with 4 of the mowers intact, meaning that the top 4 lanes were accounted for, and the only zombie we actually had to worry about was the buckethead in the very bottom lane, which of course very easily got taken out, and we had thankfully beaten day 28. Day 29 was pretty easy, but then we played the last level of the Neon Mixtape Tour, which is day 30. And something pretty cool that I haven't mentioned is that these microphone whipper zombies can't actually one-shot the Vamporcini, and he usually ends up taking like 4 of their swings to defeat him. And I didn't mention it earlier, but that was definitely a big help in this world. But with that aside, we had now beaten all of the Neon Mixtape Tour using just the max level Vamporcini. It's gone 8 for 8 so far, so let's see how it does in the... Another world I won't be spending too much time on, as it ended up being pretty easy again. But there is one important thing that I need to mention on day 1, and that's the fact that my coins jumped from 21,000 in the last level of the Neon Mixtape Tour to 25,000 on day 1 of Jurassic Marsh. And this was because I accidentally collected the rewards for a quest I'd completed, and all this really means is that if I get down to 4,000 coins, it means that I can't use them anymore. So just treat 4,000 as the new 0. And I went out of my way to mention this because it's actually important when we start to get towards the end of the challenge, but you'll see what I mean when we get there. Because for now we're skipping straight to day 18 of the Jurassic Marsh, which was the only challenging level, and it's because I was being hasty and planted a Vamporcini very far forward, and the T-Rex had been sent in for the first time, and these zombies were so quick that they completely overwhelmed me, and they'd gotten such a lead that I couldn't really prevent them from making it all the way to the end. But this was the only time this problem actually occurred, because for the rest of the levels I'd plant my Vamporcini very far in the back, which would buy me a lot more time to cover all 5 lanes. And with that, we beat days 18, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and lastly, day 28, meaning we had now made it to day 30 of the Jurassic Marsh, which was the last level that we play here. And like the rest of the levels, day 30 was also beaten pretty easily, meaning we'd beaten all of the Jurassic Marsh using just a max level Vamporcini. But things do start getting a little intense as we approach the level Torchwood lost on in the... But I won't bore you with all the easy levels, because the first 70 to 80% of this world was technically very easy, as the zombies are slow paced in the water, and problems actually only start occurring when we reach day 25, which has this one specific challenge where we have to defeat 10 zombies in under 5 seconds. And as the Vamporcini isn't very long range, things get a little technical, because you have to start timing when you're going to launch one of your lawnmowers and when you're going to be placing your Vamporcinis, as the water sometimes goes all the way back. Oh, and we can't forget the fishermen's constantly being annoying by pulling my Vamporcinis into the water. And this was actually the level that I was probably stuck on for the longest, as I was sure that I could beat it, but I just didn't know the perfect path to take. And something that I should point out is that throughout this video I've mentioned how the Vamporcini can't hit grid items, and that's true for basically everything besides, for some reason, the octopus that are tossed by the octopus zombie. And this was was actually extremely helpful in this level and all the other levels that had the octopus zombies in them, because if it wasn't the case, this level might have been impossible. And so after too many attempts and about a half hour of my time, I came to the conclusion that I was gonna have to rely on buying plant food. So that's exactly what I did by buying the plant food and then just placing it very up front, which if you have two Vampironcinis side by side that are plant fooded, they can fully counter the fisherman zombie. And using just one plant food was enough to meet that goal of 10 zombies in under 5 seconds. But then we ran into another problem where there was a buckethead, gargantuar, and a fisherman in the lane without a lawnmower, which forced me to buy even more plant food because I knew if I didn't do it here, I was gonna end up spending it anyways in the next try. And sadly, I did have to use 4,000 of my coins here, but in the end, it did get the job done. And we still had 20,000 coins to spare. Days 27, 28, and 29 ended up not being too difficult, but day 30, I instantly realized that it was gonna be a tough one to beat. And remember how I mentioned that whenever you place down the Vampironcini for the first time, it's technically invincible, but any zombie or attack can go right through it? Well, as I tried to defend this crocodile in the very bottom lane from the fisherman, it kind of ended up backfiring on me because the hook just went through the Vampironcini. And from this attempt alone, I knew this level was going to take a ton of coins to defeat, so I decided to skip it for now. And we'll come back to it at the end after we beat. And take the word beat with a grain of salt, and you'll see what I mean pretty soon. Because for now, we'd cleared every single level before day 29 pretty flawlessly. Even day 29 wasn't too difficult. The main problem were the all-star zombies, who are pretty difficult to defeat and usually end up taking out one of my Vampironcinis every time. And I was actually so distracted by them that I didn't see that this balloon zombie in the bottom lane was approaching the end, and the end didn't have a lawnmower covering it. So I ended up losing to it. I'm not gonna lie, on the second attempt, the same exact thing almost happened again, but I kind of ended up just buying a plant food as we were reaching the end of the game and we only had 3 more levels after this one. And I thought buying one plant food wouldn't be that big of a deal as we probably weren't going to use all of our coins anyways. But after we beat day 29 and moved on to day 30, that statement couldn't have been more wrong. And I knew what to expect as I've gone against this level literally hundreds of times. There's always an imp to start off in the bottom middle lane and then a balloon sent in the middle lane, which I knew I could stall because the next 2 zombies are pretty annoying with it being a newspaper that's carrying a plant food, and this guy is actually pretty easy to take care of, but the real problem approaches after we end up defeating this guy. And that problem is an all-star in the exact same lane, which is why I placed 2 Vampironcinis in that lane to cover for it. But then out of nowhere, a second all-star appeared in the bottom lane, which I'd forgotten about, and it ended up trampling the flowers and I didn't even get a chance. Because if you remember, planting a Vampironcini in front of it wouldn't have done anything as it would have ran through the Vampironcini as well. But looking aside from that, the second attempt looked much better as I prepared correctly, placing 2 Vampironcini in the middle lane, instead opting to use a plant food on the top middle lane to cover for that all-star, and the second all-star could of course just run into one of the Vampironcinis that I'd placed. And things were going pretty well until this gargantuar was sent in the middle lane and I got preoccupied by it, so a buckethead ended up getting past my vision and trampling the flowers for a second time. And the third attempt onward is where things started going bad. The first 2 attempts were basically me jogging my memory in order to remember exactly where and when the zombies come in, so I know how to time my plant food. So on the third attempt, I decided to start using my coins and buying plant food. In the end, spending 3,000 coins, but as we approached the final wave, a big problem came in as I planted a Vampironcini, but then an all-star just ran right past it and I didn't notice it, meaning I just wasted 3,000 coins and lost on the very final wave. But don't worry, it gets much worse, because on the 4th attempt, I ended up spending 4,000 coins and lost literally by a split second to the same exact all-star. If I'd planted that Vampironcini literally half a second before, it would have gotten out of its invincible mode and stopped the all-star. But that's of course not what happened. But don't worry, because on the 5th attempt, things get even worse, because at this point, I'd given up on trying to save coins to beat day 30 of Big Wave Beach and decided to just spam buy plant food. And after spending 7,000 coins, I was actually able to beat that all-star in the middle this time. But then there was another problem I had hadn't accounted for, which were the 2 Gargantuars being sent in right after in the top and bottom lanes. And I'm not gonna lie to y'all, they kind of just walked through without much of a problem. And since I only had 8,000 coins left, it technically meant that I actually only had 4,000 coins, as I'd accidentally collected that reward that I mentioned earlier. And since I knew I couldn't win with only 4,000 coins, this actually counts as the first official loss of the Vampircini, and now it's tied with the Torchwood. But of course, we still have the Big Wave Beach level to go up against, and I kind of just instantly spent all my coins buying the plant food, with me even spending over that 4,000. But to be completely honest, this didn't matter at all, as the Vampircini's just horrific against the fishermen, and even if I'd spent that 4,000 extra coins, I wouldn't have beat this level, because I was literally losing to a singular fisherman, and at one point in this level, there's a fisherman sent in every single lane. So I was just doomed from the beginning. But this also meant that the Vampircini had now officially lost to 2 levels, sadly meaning that it didn't do as well as the Torchwood did. But as we play the very final level of this entire challenge, which is modern day 31, we can look on the bright side, and that's the fact that the worst plant in the game only lost to 2 levels. And if we compare that to some previous plants like the pea shooter and cabbage pole, who both lost to 5 levels each, that's pretty impressive. And that's really it for the challenge. So if you ended up enjoying the video, consider subscribing and let me know what plant you want to see me do next. Okay, bye bye.